Hello and welcome to the third episode of Planetos podcast, a podcast dedicated to the fans of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and HBO's A Game of Thrones. A warning for all you listeners out there, this podcast will discuss all material, the books, including the main series, Dunk and Egg, The World of Ice and Fire, the novellas, the comics, the upcoming Fire and Blood, the Winds of Winter sample chapters, and all of the episodes of the show, including commentaries, background material, and bonus content, as well as theories, essays, quotes, and interviews by George, anything and everything. And I'm one of your hosts. You can, Brett. My name is Brett. You can find me. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
Reek. His name is Reek, and I'm your other host, Travis. I can be found at Sir_Travis on Twitter. We hope you enjoy today's program.
I guess you're my Ramsey. You're my Ramsey to my Reek.
Yeah. In our first episode, we talked about Game of Thrones seasons 1 to 4 being an adaptation. Yes, there were changes from book to show in some seasons, some major, most minor. However, it was a pretty faithful story to the one George was telling. At the end of season 4, as Tyrion escapes King's Landing, Arya sails for Braavos, Jon welcomes a king to the wall, Dany takes the throne as Meereen's queen, and Bran enters the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow. We were in for a path that we thought we knew pretty well from reading the books. We expected the story that A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons gave us. From seasons 5 to 7, however, we saw a significant shift from book story to show. Some people call it fan fiction, others call it inspiration. We do know that George provided David and Dan an outline of where the many storylines and characters will go. And the three of them discussed at length the ending and the plot of The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. Now, we have no clue how complete those details were, nor whether George has stuck wholly to those ideas since that conversation several years ago. All of that, as well as the critical and fan reaction to season 5, created a large and growing divide between the books and show. Some fans have stopped watching the show. Other fans have sworn off all material until the next book drops. Many have compartmentalized the show and the book, believing, as George does, that the book is the book and the show is the show. You know, you can imagine it like being on a road somewhere, and the road all of a sudden has a fork, and you can go on either path. And sometimes those roads will lead back together, and you may reach a similar destination, but you'll have had two very different experiences along the way. So we're here today to talk about what we're calling the great divide between book and show, and where the story is going. But first, we have a very special guest with us.
Oh yeah.
Our very first guest, actually, and I can think of no one better to have with us today to discuss this. Now, in our first podcast, we told our story, something we're calling our Song of Ice and Fire story. And in our second episode, we rewatched and reviewed a favorite episode from the show, the episode Blackwater. But today, we're really getting into our true purpose here on the Planetos podcast, the fans. That's what we've promised. That's what we want to cover. We want people to tell their stories. We want people to interact. We want to get different, unique perspectives. And again, we have a really big fan with us today that's going to talk about this very interesting topic. So please welcome Pat Sponaugle.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pat Sponaugle. I'm really pleased to be here for as the first guest.
Well, Pat, I'm gonna tell a quick backstory on you and I, and then we're gonna let you tell your Song of Ice and Fire story. So, you may have learned from the first couple episodes that I live in the heart of Appalachia and the hills of West Virginia, and Pat's family is originally from West Virginia. His father also, correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, but your father graduated from West Virginia University, which is where I work in Morgantown, West Virginia. So Pat and I connected. I want to say it was something to do with a storm of spoilers. We may have been tagged in the same post, or you saw that I was saying something about West Virginia, or I saw you were saying something about West Virginia, and we began to interact on Twitter. And it's a real treat to have a fellow West Virginian on, but someone who is doing a lot of writing and a lot of theorizing in the community, in the fandom, and to be honest, is very well respected. He's a kind, sincere guy, but he's also pretty brilliant. So, Pat, we want to turn it over to you. we're really buttering you up here, Pat.
Wow.
No, seriously, tell us your Song of Ice and Fire story. Tell us how you got into the books, how you got into the show. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you love in sci-fi and fantasy, and take as much time as you want.
And sorry to interrupt, but Travis, I'm just glad I didn't even have to talk through that. Like, it's just it's always a treat to listen to you. So, but yeah,
thank you.
Well, I appreciate that glowing introduction, and I'll tell you my A Song of Ice and Fire story. Back in 1998, I picked up a Game of Thrones in paperback at the LAX airport. I was flying back from Los Angeles, so I read a little bit of the book on the way home. I didn't get up to where Bran fell because I fell asleep on the plane. You know how it is. But I put the book on a shelf, and I don't think I looked at it for like years. And I had friends who I know had been reading all the books, and they would complain to me endlessly that the third book had come out and they didn't know when the fourth book was coming. And they were complaining endlessly. And they said, Pat, you would really like this book. I said, I have the first one. I just haven't had a chance to read it. And then like the fourth one came out and they were mad that only half of the story was being told. And so a lot of peer pressure went into me starting to read the first book. And I had no beef against it. But I got to where Bran fell out of the tower when Jaime pushed him. And I said, I don't know if I want to read this book. Because I've read fantasy series before where the good guys just get pounded and pummeled, and the bad guys, nothing bad happens to them until like the very end, like the end of the seventh book, maybe, the good guys finally get a break. And I didn't want to go through that like that meat grinder. And I said, I can tell this book is going to be just like that. So I stopped reading, and all my friends yelled at me who'd read the books. And then in 2010, I found out that the series was coming out. Right, they in 2011 is when the series aired, but we knew that they were making the show, and all my friends were excited. So I buckled down and I read the first one. And right about when Ned Stark was sending Beric Dondarrion off to interdict the mountain, I knew I had found the book that I wanted to read. I mean, for whatever reason, I had a hard time getting started a few times, but it just nailed me when we were in King's Landing and Ned was trying to take care of business after he had been ambushed by Jaime. So I read the first book, and I told my wife, hey, you have to read this. She said, I hate fantasy. And I said, I know, but you should really read it. And she ignored me. But friends of mine then piled on her, and they really said, Lisa, you have to read this book and get caught up. So I had borrowed the second book at that point. She read to the first book, stole the second book from me. She would read it all night long, and she got like way ahead of me. So I was constantly trying to catch up to her. And let me tell you, it was a tense time around my house when she read the third book and I had not caught up, and she had nobody to talk to about, the third book. So together we read the first four published books, saw the first season when it came out. And then as soon as A Dance with Dragons came out, we grabbed the fifth book and we read that. So I'm up to date on all the published works. I've since read the Duncan Egg books, and so I like the books and I like the shows. That's the background on the material. At the moment, I'm a feature writer for the website Watchers on the Wall, and I got that job because at the end of this, or right before the seventh season, they solicited for people to submit their writing to see if you could be a feature writer. So I submitted an essay that I had written about why a living Stannis Baratheon was very important to the Boltons and how it was a problem that for them that Brienne had killed him. And on the basis of that essay, they said I could become a feature writer because I had 170 essays written since the third season ended
Wow.
and the seventh
Yeah.
season started up. I would write like an essay, like one every 1 or 2 weeks. Because after the third season, I had started listening to people doing podcasts about the show, and they weren't big podcasts. It took me years before I discovered History of Westeros or Radio Westeros. I was just listening to people like fan type of reactions to the show, and they would be bagging on Ned that he was like a big dummy and he did all these bad things and he was stupid. I'm like, no, Ned Stark was awesome, and so I would write a defense for Ned Stark, and then people would be complaining about Jon Snow because at the end of the third season, he had abandoned the grit to head back to the Night's Watch, and there was people didn't like Jon Snow about that time. And I was like, no, Jon Snow was great. So I wrote 6 posts on how Jon Snow was great and was maligned. And there was a big, long defense on that. And that started me just every week trying to pick a topic and writing something. Now, the strength of that, I got onto some people's podcasts occasionally. I got to do a panel at the first Con of Thrones. And that's where I met the Watchers on the Wall people. And that helped me get a feature writing gig. So that's kind of how I got started, how I interacted with the books. I didn't know anything about Reddit. Just occasionally.
I still don't.
Occasionally, some of my posts will be linked to from Reddit, and but because I knew nothing about Reddit, I didn't know Jeff Hartline, Brendan Beefish. I didn't know Port Clinton. But when George R. R. Martin came to Balticon, I got to meet all those people.
Oh, nice.
And that was very exciting. That I kind of knew that they were luminaries because I tried to get on a panel at Balticon, and I was told that I was not important enough to be on a panel at Balticon. And I was like, how dare you? And so then I met these people, and I realized how I had some expertise, but I did not have like deep expertise like these people do. So it was a pleasure to meet them. I enjoy following their writings now.
Yeah. And
that I think summed up my story.
Yeah, you I know you have your own blog. What do you do? Other writings, whether it be other fantasy or sci-fi stories, or personal stories, nonfiction, any fiction, anything like that?
I write microfiction.
That's
I
right.
try to write a story in a tweet, and you can't get a whole lot of a story in a tweet, so you have to kind of give the impression of a story. And so I there's a time when I would crank out about 8 or 10 of those a month, and you don't have to write a whole lot to feel good about it. And at the end of the month, I would collect them all into a monthly collection and post that on my blog. But I'll occasionally do like a movie review, or I'll write about. I wrote a little bit about Westworld. I wrote a little bit about Ash versus Evil Dead. But most of the stuff on my blog is Game of Thrones related.
Great. And I think that's to me, we talked about this on our first episode that Brett and I came to the show in 2010, but I really enjoy talking to people, meeting people who had an introduction. I mean, like you said, you got through a few chapters in '98. You had a very early introduction to the material, and even had friends that kept saying, read this, and that to me is really fascinating, that those people who have been involved since the beginning, or very close to the beginning in some capacity, whether they've read everything or they knew about it. Like, I can't imagine a world where I don't know about Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, but it did exist at one time. So
I don't know if I could have been that loyal, Now I can wait, 10 years for a book, but I cannot imagine like reading like the first like 3 editions of a book, and then you're just like, well, okay. When's the next one? Especially in that time,
Right, especially in that time frame. I mean, they had Westeros .org and some other online chats, but I kind of imagine it being like the doldrums. The area, I think it's the Pacific Ocean. There's an area called the doldrums where there's like no wind, and you float for days and days, and the ships don't move if the wind isn't going. And I like, we can sustain ourselves. One, we're doing a podcast on this. We have other fans that we interact daily on Twitter and that. And so thankfully we have each other to get us through, which I think the winner is coming in the next year. So I really think so. I think the end of the show, I don't think George, we talked about this. I don't think George had it planned like that. I think it just works out for him to kind of recapture the story. Then again, not that he has that planned, he has some ulterior motive. It just has worked out for him to get it out around that time and focus back on the books. Pat, did you have anything to add to any of that?
Just talking about how my friends were trying to get me to read the books, and I got everyone in my office to like watch the show and then to read the books. And so I feel kind of happy that I managed to get as many people as I could. I got my dad the first book for Father's Day, and he went out and bought the entire series, and he started watching the show. And my dad reads my blog, which is like the best thing ever, because my dad thinks I'm a genius, and he's always like this. Does George R. Martin know about your blog? And I'm like, Dad, you have to give me some perspective on this.
That's great, because I can only imagine if like my parents got involved in this fandom, and like you said, some people don't understand like the level of writing and theorizing and work some of these people have done for years and years on this series. Yeah. It's just astonishing. And of course you shot an arrow into my heart. I'm gonna have to go read your Stannis Baratheon essay.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. I mean,
okay.
One of my first defense essays was defending Stannis Baratheon. So I know that you would.
Please link me that too.
Yeah,
I will. But no, I thought that it wasn't really discussed literally in the show, but the fact that Stannis was found dead on the battleground was a negative for the Boltons that Roose would have understood. That if he had a living Stannis, he could have used that as leverage against the Lannisters.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something we can talk about, because that's going to be one of the points when we get to season 5 is the certain characters who leave us in season 5 and potentially what they could contribute to the storyline. Let's get into this discussion of the Great Divide. So we'll set some markers here. We'll lay some foundation as we start our discussion. We're going to be fair here. We're not going to criticize, because that's not what we do. We're not going to be negative. But there may be some things, some scenes, some character development, some character deaths, some material that we think probably could have been better in the show. But we got to be fair here. We've got to say that, David and Dan have an outline. We don't know what that outline says. We don't know how beholden they are to what George has envisioned for the arcs in the latter books and the later books and the ending, but they're definitely adapting some of it. So we want to be careful as we proceed to understand the difference between adaptation and inspiration and original material. So, a perfect example is season 5. There's a lot of development in season 5 that's based on the stories in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. But then there are some things that we didn't expect to see that we saw. So we know from George's comments that Tyrion and Daenerys are going to meet at some point. And the scene that's in season 5 is really good. I mean, that conversation between those two characters is really good. So we think it's inevitable that they meet. We just don't know how it goes down or when it goes down. Likewise, I don't think we believe on this podcast that Stannis will die fighting the Boltons. We might think he'll die in the end, but we're not sure it's going to be fighting the Boltons. Nor do we think the Tyrells all perish in a wildfire explosion in the Great Sept of Baelor. That might happen, though. So we want to be careful, again, that we just don't know until these books really come out. We've known for a while that the White Walkers have some form of power. In season 4, we get a real inside look at their realm, their fortress, whatever, and their power to change babies into White Walkers. But again, we haven't seen that in the books. So the show is giving us some things we haven't seen. We just don't know how faithful that is. But again, we're not going to focus solely on season 5 here. We'll spend some time on it because that's where a lot of people begin to diverge the adaptation from the books to the show. So in our discussion today, we're going to do our best to discover why that great divide exists. We'll talk about why season 5 is so maligned. We'll talk about why the show can't or didn't adapt certain things from the books, and why we think the show gets it right in so many areas. Not better. Better is a subjective term, but does it really, really well in a completely different storytelling format. So I want to jump right into this book versus show discussion, and I'm going to ask, why is season 5 so maligned? Pat.
Well, that's when the show had the beginning of, like you point out, the beginning of not being a strict adaptation and providing like more of an altered adaptation. They had Dorne, but it wasn't the Dorne necessarily that plot line. We don't have Jaime going in the Riverlands. We have Jaime coming to Dorne for that. So if I discovered, if you go back and watch season 1 through 4, that we all kind of agree that's a pretty solid adaptation, but people will still like really focus on differences, like when Littlefinger told Lysa, only your sister, instead of the phrase only Cat, people set things on fire, and because only Cat was a line of dialogue that really meant something to them, but come on, there's no like semantic difference between only Cat and only your sister, but because they had invested in that type of book material, they felt it was like a personal insult, and I can't imagine the showrunners are like plotting on like insulting everyone. It's like, hey, we're really going to piss them off, but people kind of interpret it that way. So when you have season 5 coming along and it having like somewhat major differences, you're going to expect people to kind of get upset about that.
I agree with all of those points, and two, and to add on, like I think this was the first time the showrunners had to make up their own dialogue, and they were going off bullet points presumably. So, and they're not. I think they're not the greatest at writing women, and Dorne. When you get down to Dorne, it's all women pretty much, except for Doran, or that's what they focused on, and they're not the greatest at writing that. And George isn't perfect either, but he does a lot better of a job writing women than Dan and Dave do. So that could play into it, and it's HBO, and they probably have something they want to throw in there. I'm not sure, but it could come down to that.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and also we had some problems with like execution. In the first season, they just kind of hand waved away the battle with the Green Fork, but we all kind of understood why. They shouldn't have the budget for a big battle, and then we started to get those coming along. And in season 5, they gave us an amazing battle at Hardhome. I will go to bat for season 5 because there was a lot of really great elements that happened. But on the flip side, you had like some of the worst action scenes. The fight down at Dorne. If they had like a title card that came up in black and white that just said, "Jaime and the Sand Snakes have a big fight," it would have been better than what we actually had. And we understand like why that was a problem. It was a problem because they had this idea, hey, let's shoot it in this very amazing location. We have maybe 27 minutes to do all the shooting. So that's all they had. I don't know how long they actually took, but there's so many constraints to get that done.
Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't move around. I guess that's a an extremely historic or a very historic palace. They couldn't move around much. But I like what you just said there, but harkening back to season one, that it'd be kind of like, and the Ned and Jamie fight is good in season one. But imagine if that was on one end of the spectrum, and then this magnificent battle of the Green Fork was on the other. People might look at it the same way, saying, I mean, they couldn't do a better job between Ned and Jamie in that in season one. Yeah, that's a great point. So I think you've hit on something that I want to talk about. Well, first of all, I want to jump back, and I want to push back just a little bit, because both of you said that this is one of the beginnings of new material, original material. Is it? I mean, there's a lot in season 5 to me that they could have pulled from A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons that they did not, or they seem to rush or paint over quickly. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe the reason they did that, or maybe why some of that material was just not adaptable.
Yeah. Now, Brent, if you don't mind, I'll field that first. But
oh no,
yeah. I mean, a lot of season 5 still kind of like is recognizable from the books, like Cersei stuff. Even though there are changes, plot line season 5 echoes through Dance with Dragons, and the same with Jon Snow. Except that instead of him getting reports from Hardhome, we get to see Hardhome, which nobody complains about, because the rule of cool is show don't tell, and having Jon there was phenomenal. The stuff that kind of changed, Jamie and Dorne, as we kind of talked about, and of course Sansa actually having something to do other than being in the Vale, with being the replacement for Jane Poole was like a real hot point for everyone. So there was material that was kind of like echoed in the books, and you're right, we didn't get like completely straight up made up by those guys, but the liberties taken with like Dorne and Sansa's story is almost something that we could say was not completely from whole cloth, but pretty close. I mean, pretty close. I will say that I give credit to those storylines in that they were still kind of like clinging to like some shadow of it. I mean, if we look at the Dorne plot, the most important thing about the Dorne plot is that something bad happens to Myrcella. Right. Now, in the books, she doesn't get poisoned, but she's harmed grievously by Darkstar, and I'm okay with us losing a lot of the things that we might have enjoyed about Dorne. I mean, I was a big fan of Arianne Martell. I once made a prediction that Jon Snow and Arianne were going to get married at the end of the series. That was going to be ice and fire for me. Dude, I have given up on that. But I kind of get that they were not going to even kind of spend any time in Dorne. And I think Brian Cogman said, no, let's go with this kind of like streamlined plot line, because the fans will desperately want something in Dorne. And that was like a miscalculation. And I don't give them a hard time. I mean, you don't know if it works until you try it. But you're right. It's still kind of following the books. It's not, and I won't even say that season 6 or season 7 is completely fan fiction type stuff that some people might say. Because for all we know, they're following like a very well put out projected path for those characters.
Sure. I think they probably missed out on a couple opportunities too. Like George had problems with his 5-year gap, right? He skipped that. Yeah. So Edric Dane could presumably have been a bigger part of the story, and then he kind of introduced Darkstar. Whereas everyone's aged up in the show, they could have easily introduced him as like an older person, and put him in, and just made something interesting with it and gave him a backstory. I mean, I don't know, but it seems like they missed a couple opportunities where they could have.
I agree with what you're saying. Like if they had introduced Jane Poole in season 5, I would have somehow accepted it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And if Littlefinger's plan was Sansa would go with Jaime in disguise as Elaine, uh, I would have accepted that to kind of get Sansa into the North. But at some point, we can all kind of like, backyard quarterback or whatever, lots of these plot lines. At some point, those guys have got to crank out a script and get it produced and out the
Yeah.
door.
Well, my only defense with the introducing Edric Dane is because Dark Star's introduced, and a lot of people think maybe because George couldn't do anything with Edric Dane because he skipped the 5 year gap. That's the only reason I was saying introduce, or they missed like something. It still would have felt weird though. So, but a little weird. I mean, they could have made it work, but yeah.
And and we do get like weird character introductions. Like for example, the best character introduction of all time was over in Martell. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
when
Yes.
when he shows up in the brothel and he just swaggers in, puts his hand through a candle just because he can, and then starts stabbing Lannisters. We're like, this dude hit his stride immediately. And so we feel that under the right circumstances, that can happen. Then
Mhm.
again, Euron, even though I think he was really strong in this most recent season, when they introduced him in season 6, Euron was not exciting. And so you can introduce a character, it might work, it might not work.
Uh,
Right. And one of the points of season 5 is and I don't think it's a failure on their part, but all of a sudden the High Sparrow and the Sparrows and the Faith Militant just come out of nowhere. Whereas in the books, they're built up. You start to see people trickling along the road, passing Arya and Brienne and all these people heading for King's Landing. And so there's proof in season 5 that you can drop a new storyline, you can drop new characters in. And that was done, to an extent pretty well.
when Euron showed up in season 5, I had no idea who he was. Like he just showed up, and I was only, I was just a TV show watcher at that point. Like I had no idea who he was. Um, the Faith was a little bit easier to accept because they always talked about the Seven, and then, but yeah, but it still felt weird too. But they didn't. Euron completely threw me off.
Yeah, because with the faith, I mean, we all kind of understand the idea of holy men, and we all
Right.
understand the idea that there's a religion in Westeros. And
Yeah.
so if you get a guy who gets a bunch of monks ready and they start cracking heads, even if it's not well grounded, we as a species have some kind of experience with this in the real world. Whereas Euron just kind of showed up, and it was and Balon is just like, oh, it's my brother. I have a long history with you that I'm not going to talk about, and then off the bridge he goes. Um, which is a shame in a way because Euron is like such a dynamically nasty character in the books that I'm hoping that they at least touch on some of that in the final season. But you're right. You're right. I'm not surprised that you didn't really have any idea about Euron whenever he kind of blew in.
Yeah, literally blew in on the wind.
Yeah.
One thing that you mentioned, Pat, is Hardhome, specifically the episode Hardhome, and let's preface season 5 with this. The season 4 ends with the episode The Children, which is a really good episode. There's a lot of pivotal moments from the books in that episode. Season 4 ends with a bang, with all of these characters going in different directions, new things happening at old locations. We talked a little bit about it in our introduction with Tyrion and Bran and Daenerys and Jon and Stannis and Arya and Sansa. All these characters are moving into moving down new paths. And season 5 starts with the wars to come. Not the greatest episode, but I thought it set up the season pretty well. But man, season 5 ends with 4 really strong episodes, in my opinion, with The Gift, with Hard Home, one of the top rated episodes of all time. The Dance of Dragons, for us Stannis fans, it's terrible, but it's
Yeah.
emotionally, you understand the show Stannis character in that episode. You feel sympathy for what he's going through, for what happens to Shireen, and then of course that moment where Danny mounts Drogon and fly off is an exhilarating moment. And then Mother's Mercy is a very dark ending, but again pivotal moments. So we have season 5 kind of bookend with these strong episodes. What comes in the middle, though, episodes 2 to 6 are if you look at any rating, those are some really low episodes. And we talked about Mother's Mercy being dark. Is there a tonal shift in season 5? Is it too dark? Is there something off, something imbalanced about season 5 that rubs people the wrong way?
I think you're right. I mean, mainly because season 4 ended with like Arya stealing off to Bravos. I think that was like our final shot, right?
Right.
And and there's like the wind in her hair, and she's like looking towards the horizon, and we've got like this kind of like semi-triumphant, dark-based music. So I think we all kind of thought that we were going to start. That this is going to be like the beginning of like the climb of our characters, and in some cases, that did kind of happen. But the way Game of Thrones is, bad things happen to everybody, and I think season 5 was when season 4 definitely was bad for the Lannisters. Season 5 was bad for Cersei, and but I think in some cases season 5 was weird because almost everybody's storyline was either caught in a repeating loop or was the reverse of season 2. You look at like everybody's storyline, like Stannis has a similar march into a big battle and boom, I lose. Whereas Sansa is similarly, I'm held captive and things aren't good, and there's like some weird like one to ones that you can go. Where Tyrion has like a reverse journey. Tyrion starts off in charge season 2 and then ends up kind of grievous wound, and in season 5 he has this travel from he just killed his dad, he just killed Shay, he's not doing well, he gets abducted, and then he ends up you know kind of like in a position of trust with Danny. And so you can trace this kind of like repetition. So in a way, kind of feel like either we're trading water for some of our characters or their fates are being flipped through season 5. And that might bum some people out.
I think a lot of season 5 and 6 are kind of a weird repeat too, like the Battle of Winterfell, and then John does it too.
Yeah, right.
It's just like everyone succeeds that time or something.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's sad that Stannis, fails to succeed, and then John comes along and does succeed.
yeah,
Um, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought of that, but you're probably right about that, Brett.
Yeah, there's definitely some repetition, and you said this, Pat, that the books have always been dark. They're more realistic and gritty than they are dark. But there's some bad things that happen. But I want to read and I do not have the username, but I want to read this post that was on Reddit a couple years ago. I had to go back and find this, but I think it kind of encapsulates some of the frustration with season 5, especially with the villains in season 5. So we'll link this in the show notes and give credit to the person who posted this. But basically, what they posit is the villains, especially Ramsay Bolton, gets a free pass, and basically, the user says the show's tragedies have always been organic. Protagonists never got anything for free. Antagonists didn't either, but it seemed that they did in season 5. Bad shit happens to everyone in the books. And like you said, there's kind of a 90-degree angle. There's really bad stuff for certain people, and then other people progress really fast, like Tyrion. They move, like Tyrion moves. He's got a very dark arc in A Dance with Dragons, but at the end, he's still kind of in a dark place, but he's moving. Whereas in season 5, he goes from not so dark. He really doesn't have too dark of an arc in the show, and then he's into a new position of trust, back to where he was. But let's talk about the Boltons for a minute, especially Ramsey. That it kind of seems like David and Dan created a Superman in him. I mean, this guy, and I'm going to throw in the Sons of the Harpy here too. Ramsey Bolton and 20 men uh, burn Stannis Baratheon's supplies, the best battlefield commander left in Westeros, who then just happens to march out in the open right toward Winterfell. I mean, come on, send some scouts or something. And then Barristan Selmy, the best swordsman left in the world, other than Jaime Lannister, is defeated by a bunch of rich aristocrats in masks, and the Unsullied can't even stop them. It just seems like there were some villains that were, for some reason, given these superpowers. And I don't know if it was a rush to say, oh, these two characters, we need to start consolidating and getting rid of some of these storylines. What do you all think about that?
I think it was consolidation.
Yeah, I think the criticism about Ramsey and his 20 good men is like spot on. I mean, I think that's just like ridiculous. I can only imagine that Ramsey is really a dark sorcerer and he has control of a army of ghouls underneath Stannis' camp. We may as well pretend that he like is a Slytherin from Hogwarts because how he took them out, it was so bad news. But I was less stressed about like the Sons of the Harpy because I think that people specifically would say what you said, that like there were a bunch of aristocrats. When I guarantee those guys were armed thugs who were pit fighters, or mercenaries, and so on. And I'm okay with Barristan Selmy being killed by them because I think he was like fighting like it was like 1 versus 7 at that point.
Yeah.
And nobody likes the idea that an old legendary swordsman getting killed by by any number of guys, but that stuff like does happen.
Right.
But I think that the bigger problem was that we were led to believe that the Unsullied are super badass, and they are. They really are super badass. Even fighting the Harpies, they were badass because they were always outnumbered. But we feel like they didn't do well. And one benefit of season 7 is that we got to see the Unsullied much more efficiently awesome when they were killing Lannisters.
Right.
But I do agree. Taken like in whole, it looks like Ramsey and Harpies were just like overpowered how they were presented, particularly Ramsey. And Stannis was dumb. I mean, it just seems like a dumb deal for him to kind of like wander up to Winterfell, and at that point, you go ahead, good.
Yeah, I know, and we know, I've had this discussion actually that because I was really angry at that that ending for him, and Beefish. So we'll think about his story arc different than his book arc. The man is forced to do something that he doesn't want to do in sacrificing his daughter. He does get the relief that he sought. The weather lets up, and then he finds out that people have abandoned him. Melisandre rides away, and so but at that point he's just like, I'm done with this. I've got one more shot. I'm going for it. I still think, however, Stannis would be like, we're gonna walk through the Wolf's Wood, and we're not, they're not gonna know we're coming. Yeah. I also think there, and this is just a small nitpick, but I also think that it would have been interesting to see like the sellswords that abandoned Stannis have been the ones that went to the Boltons.
Yeah, and that's what I assumed. I assumed that cavalry, because where else are they going to go? I mean, we have, there's nothing on the show that implies that they went anywhere. So I assume that they went straight to Winterfell and said, if you pay us and give us food, we will be happy to fight for you.
Yeah.
Well,
because that makes sense.
Well, what's confusing to me too is that's gold backed by the Iron Bank. Why would they defect unless there was just like what I don't know. I just don't get why they'd defect. It's
part of the problem with that season is that in the books we had this understanding of like the hardship that Stannis' army goes through. That is this, it's this crawl through the north, in the blizzards. Yeah. Whereas on the show, it's a shorthand type of deal where we just kind of understand that, like, oh, things are kind of bad. Oh, they have no food, and we have to kind of like suspend our disbelief on how bad things are with Stannis' camp at that point. Because until then, like early in season 5, Stannis was looking pretty, right? He's at the wall. He just kicked ass. His guys were like the shit that was going to be taking care of business in the north. And then the weather was bad, and it doesn't feel very satisfying.
Yeah.
The way they should have presented it.
Well, and also like how Ramsay infiltrated a camp of like professional sellswords that get paid to kill people. Like, how did that happen?
And
they've got to have sentries.
You think somebody would be guarding the food,
if
not from being sabotaged, but from the men just raiding their own food supplies, because that's what you do. You're like, right. I'm hungry. Hey, there's nobody watching the food. Let's get some food. I mean, we know that about to happen.
And to go back to the Brienne thing, or not? Sorry, I'm thinking of Brienne because there's a Brienne chapter. But Barristan dying from 7 people. You made a good point. I never thought about it being like aristocrats and some rich people. They've probably held a sword and they've probably trained. But isn't there's a Brienne fight in the book, right? I don't remember a specific one where she thinks she's outnumbered and she's what does she say? She's got there's no choice.
Chance. Brienne was sizing herself up against a handful of guys. She knew that she would have to fight because it's the right thing to do, but she would not be able to win that fight because there were too many of them. And it wasn't like she was facing 20 guys. It was like a half a dozen guys that she knew that her chances were 0.
Yes. Right. And what was the quote? No chance and no choice?
Close enough.
Or what did I get it wrong?
It might have been no choice, no chance, or no chance, no choice.
Okay.
But,
anyways, that's a great quote. But that's instantly what I thought of when you brought that up.
We've already started talking about this a little bit, but I have a notion that David and Dan, again, they're working off an outline, but they're working on the 3 C's. All right, stick with us here. 3 C's: consolidating, collapsing, and concluding. Is season 5 the opening act of their end game? Is that why we're on this path? We know that they met with George, I think it was in 2013, either shortly after season 3 aired and season 4 was already in production. So if this is the opening act to their end game, it would come in season 5, right? Do we think this is kind of the opening act of their end game, and that's why a lot of stuff is moving really fast? And they're tearing some characters down to build them back up in season 6, as we see.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And one of my points, earlier was that season 5 and season 2 had these weird similarities, like either a retread or a mirror image of what was going on. And I've always kind of felt that was deliberate in that season 1 kind of set the stage, but then everything kind of started getting into high gear season 2 because Ned was dead. We knew everybody. They brought in some new characters, but it kind of like pushed what was going on in the War of the 5 Kings. And that got things started. And then season 5 being either a repeat or a reverse of everyone's character arcs in season 2 is we're now like as if we're like entering into the forest. Now we're like coming out of the forest, and the woods kind of look the same when you're at the edges. So that's how I feel that they kind of like reset what was going on with everybody in a different kind of position, but kind of harmonious with how they got started. They kind of push on into the ending. But definitely, when you refuse the consolidation, definitely they had to consolidate things down and compress stuff to, I guess, collapsing would work as well. Kind of
compressing is better. I'm going to steal that from you. So
all right. Fine.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I didn't look at it that way. Like the reversal of where the characters have been or where they ended up, and then where they're going, and it's I forgot what I was going to say, so I'm just going to agree with you.
So let's talk. We've got a lot of stuff to get through here, so let's talk about. how much of season 5 and beyond is a reaction to A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons? And I want to preface that in two ways. One, if you go back and you talk to some people and you look at some of the initial reactions to A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, we know A Feast for Crows is set in certain locations. And there was there was an initial reaction that people were like, "Oh my God, where's Jon Snow? Where's Daenerys? Where's all these characters?" A lot of great storylines in A Feast for Crows, but people had an initial reaction where they weren't sure about that book. Similar thing happened with A Dance with Dragons. There were a couple famous battles left out. We've got the Myronese Knot. So one, is it a reaction to some of that material that people, at first didn't like? Two, is it a reaction to what was adapted in season 5 didn't compare to some of the storylines in those two books? So what do you guys think about season 5 and even some of the seasons beyond being either a negative reaction to A Dance with Dragons and A Feast for Crows, or people having a positive reaction to some of the storylines in those books and not getting that stuff in the seasons? Could that be affecting season 5 and some of the other seasons?
Brett, you want to go first with this?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go at it like this. I watched season 5. I had no problems with it until I got into this fandom and then listen to people pick it apart. Now I'm going back and I'm like, oh well, I didn't really like that either. But so maybe there's a divide there, like with people who read the books first and then see it and they're like, oh, this is crap, and are just super critical about it. But then you got show watchers that are never gonna. They just watch it for entertainment, and they're never gonna pay any closer attention than just like, tits and dragons. And so, um, but yeah, I think as far as like fandom goes, it wasn't a good season, I guess, for the franchise.
Yeah, along with what Brett just said, I have show watching people who have never read the books, and they didn't understand why people were really angry about season 5. I mean, they understood why people might be distressed that Sansa was in such dire straits, but they didn't have the same kind of like visceral reaction to somebody who, hey, that shouldn't be happening to Sansa at all. Set this season on fire. And I respect the people who are upset about it. I don't
Yeah.
want to try to tell them they weren't, um, but it, I didn't think that it was uh, bad from like a storytelling standpoint. I think it was just simply it wasn't the adaptation that they wanted, and I think that you can point out to like poor execution here or there, but I felt that what we were given in season 5 was still a very serviceable type of story, particularly to kick off the next season, season
Yes.
6, season
And
7.
and I think a lot of people fell off with the rape scene with Ramsay and Sansa, which that I think that was something that was very poorly executed. I don't know if you could have executed that right, but all the actors came out and said they were really uncomfortable with it. So maybe, I mean, they could have implied it or had, but yeah, I'm not sure about that. But yeah, I think that was pretty poorly done. And a lot of people, quit watching it after that they because that's something that
Well,
triggered
it,
trauma.
it,
So
it was a hard scenario. I mean,
yeah,
it was hard. It was kind of like when Shireen got burned.
Right.
yeah,
I can imagine it happening. Even with our beloved Stannis in the books, I can imagine it happening.
Yes.
But it was a hard pill to swallow. I mean, I was
yeah,
like, oh my
Right.
God, I can't believe they're gonna burn Shireen. And boy,
Well,
it happened. Yeah.
yeah,
and
yeah,
as to Sansa, I agree with both of you that I think if you were able to, step out of yourself and kind of look objectively at season five, season five is kind of the middle chapter, the middle act of this long story, and you could look at The Empire Strikes Back and other sagas. The middle act is where things get really dark and really bad for our characters and for the story, and then we build up after that. But Sansa, to me, Sansa's storyline just stops after season four. I mean, she reverts back to the same circumstances that she was in before.
Oh yeah.
She really has no. It's almost like her steps in season four, where she's a player in the game now, and she just rolls over like a direwolf pup, and I don't even think a direwolf pup would even do that, and just lets the world screw her over again. So let's talk just a little bit about Sansa, but I also want to talk about it in the context of Littlefinger, because there are some irrational choices made by some characters in season five, especially Littlefinger. I mean, Sansa is his key piece on the chessboard, and he just drops her off in Winterfell, not even knowing what the Boltons are like. I mean, I kind of thought this was my scenario for how season five was going to end. I thought Stannis would defeat the Boltons, and I thought Littlefinger would then defeat Stannis and just swoop the North right out from under him and put Sansa in and have complete control of the Vale and the North, and then you're going to be like, whoa, what the hell just happened there? But he just leaves.
I'm going to backtrack for like 2 seconds, and then I'll answer that one. With the so I don't know if you've listened to the newest Game of Owns episode with the Boltons. So
I have not.
Oh, it's hilarious.
I know the people that they had on. I met them at Con of Thrones. Right. I know what you're talking about.
Yes, it's hilarious, but I think they quit watching it after the Sansa thing, and their one reason, is because it was horrific. But the way they explained it was they took a character that's so divisive in the fandom, and then threw her up against Ramsay and had that scene go down. Whereas Jane Poole is not divisive at all. Like, you just feel bad for her, and it works better in that way. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say about it. But that episode is hilarious, and they go into all of that, and it's great. It's great, and it's called The Roos is Loose.
Yeah, in some ways. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that title's great.
Well, you could tell Zach had like a lot of fun with that episode. So, like,
the Sansa thing, in some ways, part of the complaint was that clearly it's an important situation for Theon, because we know in the books, Theon is Reek. The whole situation with Ramsay and Jane Poole and him being pressured by Mance and the Spearwives, forces him to take steps that we feel is going to be some kind of a redemptive type of journey for Theon. And by putting Sansa into that, it kind of made Theon's journey problematic, because it then required Sansa's story to be one of debasement. And it's a situation where a woman, has to suffer for this guy's story, when even though Jane Poole was suffering for his story, it was a much more complicated scenario. And I don't want to say that nobody cares about Jane Poole. I care about Jane Poole, but we also care about Theon.
Yeah.
And so it made it kind of harder. It might have seemed like a convenient way to bring Sansa into the North and replace a character that nobody really knew to kind of serve, Theon's story. And I can see how that might have happened in a writer's room, particularly a writer's room full of dudes.
Yeah.
Hey, look how convenient this all works, but we kind of understand from a emotional storytelling point of view the problem.
But do you remember even like what was Littlefinger's plan with that, and what was the Bolton's plan? Because that didn't make any sense. Like, let's instantly rebel. against
Right.
someone who.
The deal, right? I mean, I think Travis had wanted to talk about Littlefinger's plans and what didn't make sense with the Boltons. The it is complicated because in the books, the Boltons clearly have the support of the Lannisters, and the whole marriage deal was facilitated by the Lannisters, with Jane Poole, who was their captive, being this Arya analog. Everyone would think she was Arya to marry Ramsay, and then that would give them, a legitimate claim to Winterfell because it was not just the Boltons, it was also the Starks running things. And to flip that to Sansa is a situation, right? Because Sansa is a wanted fugitive by the crown. So it would have been smarter for the Boltons to have a fake Arya instead of
Yeah.
going with Sansa. I mean, I completely agree, but I guess I kind of accepted it, and they're like, well, I guess we're just gonna have to go with Sansa, and they're not gonna try to pretend that Sansa is Arya, that type of weirdness.
Yeah.
But the whole point was the importance of getting a Stark girl in some capacity to marry Ramsay to kind of produce an heir. So and then all the Northmen would say like, well, I guess by the back of the rule book victory conditions, the Boltons, win. We all agree to this type of thing, and that's kind of the way feudal society worked. They just kind of like went along with that type of stuff.
Right, and to the show's credit, we don't see in the books we get a very big dose of the characters that are remaining in the North, Wyman Manderley and all of these people, the Lady Dustin.
Right.
We don't have that in the show, so you can kind of see a scenario where the Boltons are really the only game in town. So you can see why they were capitulated, or they were able to outmaneuver everyone else. So, we touched on, we're three guys, three white guys. I want to be careful here as we talk about sexism.
Tread lightly.
Yeah. Let's lightly touch it and then take off quickly and to the next point. But sexism is something that is leveled against both the show and the books. And we got a full dose of a really terrible circumstance for Sansa. We get something similar, not as bad. I mean, I hate to say that, with Jaime and Cersei in season 4 when he rapes her.
Right.
Okay, I shouldn't say that. It's not as bad. It's terrible, but it's presented in a different way. We have more sympathy for Jaime in that situation than we probably should. But sexism is something that has, like I said, been leveled at the show and books. Let's talk about that for just a minute, and then let's get out of this quickly.
And I want to say, if we get something wrong, feel free. Well,
please.
Well, I don't even have to tell you to feel free. Just whatever. We know we're gonna get roasted if we get it wrong.
And I'm not and I'm. Even though I'm a dude and I got a beard and whatever, I'm not afraid to talk about those things. I somehow wrote a long essay on the Jaime, Cersei, and the Sept type of thing, and nobody set me on fire, but maybe nobody read it. But I got good feedback from some women, so that I felt good about that.
Good.
But yeah, you're right, and I think we all agree that in season 4, when Jaime and Cersei have their sex in the Sept, we all got a different impression from the book than we did from that show. And it really did seem like everybody involved on the show thought something else was going on than what we saw. And it was like, really? You thought he was raping her? It didn't seem like, they were just having weird sex. It's like, no, it really seemed as if she was not into it. And, it was like, I don't know how else you could put it that way.
Right.
Now, I do know that because in the book, it's written from Jaime's point of view, you could make a case that he rapes her in the book and he's just unaware of what's going on.
Well, and I think we agree that the Jaime and the Cersei scene, and obviously the Ramsay and Sansa scene, is very problematic, very unfortunate. Let's talk, generally about sexism to an extent in regards to the books. I mean, we're dealing with a time period, even though it's a fantasy series, but we're dealing with George overlaying a fantasy story on a medieval setting, setting of the Middle Ages, when women really had no right. They were property, both whether they were highborn or lowborn. But I really think the show and the books, the characters that are growing and coming to power. We're gonna have a lot of women at the end of this series that are strong and in power and really shaping the future of Planetos, if you will. But you all agree with that?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that it's I don't think that George in particular enjoys
No,
putting
that's
his
right.
women characters through any tribulation per se that he does for anything else. But I think it's always fair to point out stuff that this seems sexist, or this seems racist, or whatever. I don't think there's anything gained in like not bringing that up. And I think being able to talk about it kind of like puts it all out there so everybody can kind of like approach it and how they're enjoying it. Because you can still enjoy the show and recognize that, hey, this means something and it might affect people differently, without trying to tell them that, like, no, you should not be upset by this because it's just like a fantasy story, gets skinned or whatever. It's worthwhile to address it.
I think.
So,
Oh no, yeah. No, I think that. I mean, obviously the TV show is popular and that blew up, but I think too, with with the internet being a thing now and people are talking about these problems, and then it's being brought up through story. People are talking about these societal problems we do have, and we all get to learn and enjoy a story together. Uh, it's great.
Right.
Um,
So let's move on to the inclusion of some material that really had no payoff in season 5. And there's three things I want to talk about, and let's discuss them briefly, and let's move on to some good things about the series. First we get the prophecy of the Valonqar. Well, actually, we don't get the Valonqar. But we get, the opening of season 5 is Cersei flashback, the first flashback of the show. Cersei remembering going to Maggie the Frog's tent or hut,
sure.
or hut, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Master Yoda, Dagobah.
Okay.
But famously, the Valonqar is left off of that, and I think we all believe that the Valonqar is a prime motivation for why Cersei is so paranoid and delusional at times, because she sees conspiracies around her everywhere that she thinks are wholly laid in Tyrion's lap. Secondly, I want to talk about Brienne. Now, the meta reason be that Brienne was filming The Force Awakens, and so she just wasn't available for a lot of scenes in season 5. But she just sits outside an inn overlooking Winterfell, waiting for Sansa. And then conveniently, when Stannis Baratheon starts marching and she goes to execute him, Sansa lights the candle. And then finally, the North remembers, which the Grand Northern Conspiracy, if you will. Apparently the North does not remember. It was just an old washerwoman in Winterfell and that guy at the end that gave Brienne a room. Let's talk about those three. Those were included in season 5, but they really went nowhere.
So I propose this, or I'm going to ask you this, Travis. What really did Brienne do in The Force Awakens and and The Last Jedi? It's not a meta reason.
Yeah. I wish that cut scene of her and Finn in The Last Jedi had been included. That to me was a really, I don't know if either of you saw
I
that.
have not seen it, but I'm
go
looking it up.
go watch that cut scene, because there's a really phenomenal deleted scene between her and Finn that really gives. I mean, he points out that she's and if you read the Phasma comic, I don't know if either of you read that, but you get some insight into her character and what she's willing to do, and how she escapes Starkiller Base. But anyways, yeah, they really didn't. She really didn't do much in The Force Awakens. So maybe while Captain Phasma was off screen, she was at Winterfell waiting for Sansa.
It's okay. She's the new Boba Fett, and Boba Fett, all the side stuff and all the well, he didn't do anything in the. But he just stood there.
Jedi. He just fell into a hole.
Yeah. but he had the cool armor. He looked cool.
He was pretty awesome.
All the backstory now, I mean, he's still my favorite, but he didn't do anything in the movies.
Right.
So.
Anyway, but back to your 3 points. I don't mind the Valonqar not being there, because the prophecy, it still had a payoff with Cersei's straightforward antagonism towards Marjorie. So I thought that framed
good. Yep.
The involvement with Marjorie pretty well. Although but again, whenever you drop something out of the show that's in the books that we feel is so important, and I guess there's a difference between what's important in the books and what's essential to the story, because we don't yet know what really is important. So important that it cannot be taken out of the story without it falling apart. Like Jon Snow's parentage is not just important, it's essential. I mean, if for some reason we never found out about Jon's mom, well, we'd lose our minds, right?
Right.
And George could say oh, wink, wink. I wonder who his mother was. And we're like, no, you asshole, you had to have paid that off. So that's an essential deal. So I don't know what's going to happen with Cersei. She might have a fate that's different than in the show than in the books, because we feel that the Valonqar is going to pay off. Although it would crack me up if at the end of the book Cersei is still alive, and the implication is that 5 years later the Valonqar is going to kill her, and just she'll die eventually.
I like that.
I do like that. I like that a lot.
I actually think there's a lot of theories that the Valonqar is Jaime. I think most people think that. You see other theories that it could be like Euron or Sandor or whatever. I actually would like for the Valonqar to be Tyrion, because I'd like Cersei to get something right at some point. I'd like for her paranoia to pay off.
And her paranoia being the thing that caused it. She'd have to treat Tyrion like shit all her life, but she did it.
That's a great point about prophecy, especially in George's work, that you don't know the meaning of prophecy. Sometimes you don't know what the motivation behind the people telling the prophecy. Sometimes you individually create the prophecy for yourself because you focus so much on it, and Cersei's a perfect example of that.
I too was listening to the
Davos Fingers.
Was it Davos Fingers?
It was Davos Fingers.
I listened to that, and the
Now you're giving away all our trade secrets.
They couldn't tell that from the intro of how we start off the episode.
Yeah.
I think I did it better than Brenda Beefish, though. And
he's such a nice guy on Twitter that he'll probably say yes, he
did. He's known for his kindness and his,
he is.
allowing of slights to go by. So now for Brienne, I don't. I agree that I miss Brienne's journey through the Riverlands. It's not a very compelling thing to see cinematically, but there's great character bits with her. I mean, her killing a bunch of the bloody mummers is kind of cool, and there's a lot of important things that happen for her as a character, but I don't know how cinematic it would be for her to kind of wander around. Although we miss out on the Broken Man speech,
right?
But her being up the north, I guess, was fine in the sense that it paid off in season 6 that she is there for Sansa then. But I honestly, everyone says, "Oh, Brienne, you failed. You missed the the lighting of the candle." Well, what could she do?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
honestly, what could she do? Like,
Right.
just kind of wander up and like, hey, I'm a good-looking
Hey,
blonde, and I'm big. I'm
open the
challenging you
door.
all to single combat. It's not, I mean, there's nothing that she could,
Yeah.
she had no plan. So that in itself was kind of like a problem. So I didn't really mind. Yeah, I didn't mind that it allowed her to have, even though we don't want Stannis to die. Brienne was the one who had the
Right.
you know the the story arc that would allow that to happen. That it would mean.
Right. Right.
And what was our third thing?
The North remembers, which I think
Right.
is also kind of tied to why it's not there. So if it had been, Brienne may have been able to be an actor in that. I kind of thought. Sorry, Breck.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I kind of thought at some point, what if Brienne had kind of taken on the Mance role of getting in Winterfell, not pretending to be someone, but even joining the Bolton cause to, I don't know. That's just kind of a thought that pops into my head.
You go ahead. You go ahead. You're building off of what he's saying. I'm diverging.
I'm disagreeing with it. I mean, there's pros and cons. Brienne is known by at least some Bolton men because he was a captain of the Boltons.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And so
Right.
if she did try to sneak in, then she probably would have been recognized, which is good, fine, because Mance's team was caught, trying to get Jane out. So there might be some kind of harmonious type of parallel going on.
Theon helping her or something.
Yeah, but I just don't see what Brienne would have conceivably been able to do unless she had like one of the northern houses who acted like the Umbers did in the books.
Right.
Cause problems, and we just didn't get that kind of a setup. Some of the things that the showrunners just don't go forward with are some of the more political things with the smaller houses. Also with the more kind of like they will go in on the mystical stuff like the White Walkers. They can't do the dragons. I mean, they can't not do the dragons, but things like Quaithe and the prophecies, they just kind of shoveled away. Arya having her connection with Nymeria while she's in Bravos, they just didn't commit to those things, and some of that could be, Arya in Bravos is very inside of her mind. There's a lot that goes on that we see from her point of view that has nothing to do with what she's physically doing. It's kind of like what she's observing and thinking about. And I kind of forgive them when, because no one's paying me money to write a TV show. But it's like, can we make this compelling to people who have not read the books? Maybe not. So that's why I feel that they went with some more obvious type of stuff, like having like the waif be such an antagonist, and it's kind of like, again, not a really well executed stuff. But even Arya and Bravos had cool things like the play that was going on. I thought that was really well done. I mean, that was, there were some redeeming bits, like very small bits about Arya and Bravos. Stuff that was not as good. But I think it's just because they couldn't kind of like build something that was like compelling from the kind of like the inner narrative that Arya had.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just mad that Wyman Manderley is not anywhere in the show, because I would really like to see him stab the sausage.
Right. Oh yeah.
And say the speech, or say the little jab he says. He would have grown up to be a Frey,
Yeah,
and take a bite
so
of
epic.
it. And then the Frey pie scene, that would have been great.
And the fact that he has so many chins that he can, I mean, we think he survives. He could probably take a slash to one of them and be okay.
Yeah. Well, he took a slash. What is it, a slash to 3 of the 4 chins?
That's right. Yeah, it was more than one.
It was a deep cut.
It was a deep cut. He'll be fine.
But
he'll be fine.
That's the one thing I don't blame, like D&D with the poor writing is Arya stuff because what really the faceless men aren't like that explained or like what are they doing? Even like Dabo's fingers was having trouble like picking this
Yeah,
apart.
yeah. There's a lot of like nuance and implication, but
Right.
but a lot of stuff that we kind of like feel that we know in our hearts about the Faceless Men has come out of people thinking deep about it and writing
Right.
and debating
Right.
about and not necessarily like laid out for us.
Yeah,
Um, and that's kind of hard to present on the screen.
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, you know, some people say that season 5 ends with too many loose ends, not a lot of hope for next season. But I think and we can debate that till the cows come home and probably not arrive at an answer. But I
I've
think
never heard that
what you
one.
just said is interesting, Pat. That there's a lot that we think about this series and future events based on writings, essays, theories, speculation, podcasts we listen to. How much of that contributes to um, either some of the problems that people have with the show, or even with some of the books.
I guarantee it probably does because we know there are people who have put together incredibly elaborate and detailed, like this explains everything type of theories that I guarantee are probably wrong. Like maybe 10% are right,
Right. Right.
and and when that doesn't pay off, what's going to happen with them? Because it's like you invest in like I know exactly what's going to happen, and then the show won't commit to it, and then you're like, oh, the show didn't get the show doesn't understand the story the
Right.
way I do, and
Right.
then George R. R. Martin publishes A Dream of Spring, and there's nothing that confirms your theory. It's like, oh, why does George hate me? The TV show ruined the books because he decided to just let them write the thing.
I'm
So we're going
sometimes
to see that. Yeah.
sometimes I'm glad that I'm just blissfully unaware of certain things sometimes, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, because I don't try to speculate too. I just like to listen to different theories. I don't really sit there and try to come up with my own.
So let's move now into our final section here, and let's talk about some of the things that we think the show is doing right. Some of the in favor of the show points. Primarily we're going to talk about some really great show only scenes and successful changes that improved upon the books, in our opinion. We've tried to capture as many of these scenes as we can remember or find, so please forgive us if we missed something. But a few things that we want everyone to remember. First, uh, this show has brought a lot of fans to the books. Brett and I are perfect examples of it. Pat told his story that he came to the books first and then caught up quickly right before the show came out. But one of the things I recently heard on another podcast, I don't know if either of you listened to Ron and Jim on Bald Move. Um, they're pretty cool guys. But they were taking questions at Con of Thrones, and someone asked about the book to show to adaptation, and I think it was Ron that made the point that at its zenith, this show is reaching around 100 million people. That includes piracy and all that, and this even people who don't watch the show know these characters in pop culture, and so George's books were immensely popular, but the show made it even more so. So we had a lot of show watchers that have converted to book readers. Further, there's a lot of things. When George was originally approached about adapting this material, it was in a film, and people had seen the success of the Lord of the Rings, and they came to him. And they said, we want to make this into a movie, and like one movie they were going to focus on John, and one movie they're going to focus on Danny. And so George was like, I'm not doing that. Like I got away from TV to make this series, and that's not the story I want to tell. So a lot of this was deemed unfilmable, and look what the show was able to do. Um, uh, uh, you know, uh, a show can. We all have an image of these characters and these events in our mind, these castles in our mind, and sometimes they don't look the same in the show, or maybe they look a little better than they do in the books. But a book has a limitless budget, and obviously the show is constrained. Although we're talking about serious budgets here. And then another point in the show's favor is aging up the kids. That's one thing that George wish he could go back and do, age up the kids. And then obviously one final point is the show really has the ability to enhance secondary and minor characters. Like, you get moments with them, you get history and ideas in their from their mind that you don't get in the books. Even though George is brilliant at that with such a large cast of characters that he has. But let's talk about some of the original material. There's a lot of great scenes in the show that were not in the books. And specifically, I want to talk just about a few scenes, and then you guys expand on them and add some. There's the scene of Ned and John leaving Winterfell. In the books, Ned doesn't say goodbye to John, or if he does, it's off screen. That's a pretty big omission on George's part. Robert and Cersei discussing their relationship very early in the show. What a great scene! That was a really powerful scene, and it makes you think. Imagine if these two had been nice to each other. Like, they would have been a power couple to be reckoned with. Obviously, Cersei showing her love for Joffrey. We get a lot of scenes between Varys and Littlefinger. We get Bronn and the Hound, Stannis and Shireen, Catelyn telling Talissa about caring for Jon as a child. Jaime at Tyrion's trial, which is another omission. We don't know if Jaime's at the trial. Grey Worm and Missandei, that awesome scene of Olenna and Marjorie talking about Joffrey's death. I mean, that's such a powerful scene. And then that scene of Tywin reforging ice into the two swords, which is a very powerful opening. So let's talk about some of those show-only scenes, and you guys add some more scenes if you can think of them.
Ygritte shooting John with the bow, right? That's a show, right? Or is that?
No, actually, I had it on the list, and then I went back, and she doesn't shoot him by herself somewhere. She shoots him there at the tower.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was wondering about that.
Escaping the wildlings, she's shooting arrows, but you're right. It's a more personal and intimate type of situation happening. I to add to your list of things, I'll add Jory talking to Jaime outside King Robert's bedroom, because I was a Jory fan.
Oh yeah.
And the deal is, when I'm reading the books, I thought, man, I like this Captain of the Guard Jory guy. I like him a lot. And then he gets killed, outside Littlefinger's brothel. He gets run down, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe they killed Jory. I was so mad that this secondary character got killed. And it's like, how naive I am to imagine that this should have really mattered. They were going to do so much later on. Anyway, so in the show, because Jory is not a point of view character, and Jaime is not that Jory goes to give a message to the king on Ned's behalf. Jaime is guarding the chamber, and they briefly talk about that. Jory says, "Hey, you and I fought together at the Battle of Pike," and that was like a nice moment, because Jaime just like kind of warms up to him, and they have like this cool little bonding moment until Jaime tells him to go fuck off, and that I'm not going to be your errand boy, and then when Jaime kills Jory, it's a much more personal moment, altogether. So I thought that was really well done, and they could take a character from the books and kind of like breathe a little bit extra life into it. And also it had them talking about Thoros of Myr and his burning sword, which gets echoed later on between Ser Jorah and Barristan, that they're talking about the Battle of Pike and Thoros running around with a flaming sword. And I love Thoros. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big Thoros fan, so I was happy with all of that stuff.
Another scene too is I thought set up the series really well is Cersei and Jamie talking. They're talk. You've got not Robin Aaron,
John Aaron.
John
John.
Aaron's body, and they're talking and they're doing their little conspiracy thing. What is that? It's like the big
It's like
one of the first scenes,
one
right?
of the first scenes. Yeah.
It's at the set. Yeah.
And I think they D&D threw that in there because of what a train wreck their original pilot was.
They did well early on to have these like little character moments between two people. Sometimes having sex to have sometimes.
Yeah. Now it's like awkward silent moments for comedy. Yeah. It seems like.
Yeah.
But I mean, I still think they do good writing. I had a scene in my head. Now that was in the later seasons, but it's gone now. It was.
But Travis, did you mention Arya and Tywin having their
no? That's definitely something in the next section which we can move to now. But the show has a lot of change scenes or change character moments that when they adapted them from the book, they either changed the character interactions or they combined some characters. Specifically, as you mentioned, Pat, Arya and Tywin versus Arya and Roose.
Right.
We obviously know that in A Clash of Kings, Arya serves Roose. And man, if you go back and read those chapters, in retrospect, you full well know that Roose Bolton is going to kill the Starks. Like he's hunting wolves. He's got all of these people coming in. He's burning books. He's burning letters left and right.
But it's funny you say that, but when I first read the book, I thought Roose Bolton was awesome. I was like, this guy is so cool. Why won't Arya tell him that she's Arya? And Arya's right. Like, in Arya's head, she's like, this guy's like really creepy. I'm like, Arya, you're just a girl. Tell him who you are. It's his job to get you to safety, and because he was weird, he would have to whisper in the leeches, but I thought a character this screwball has got to be screwball for a cool purpose. Kind of like I also thought Walder Frey was going to be like with the Starks till the very end because he was so crabby and so obnoxious that I thought I could see this guy being obnoxious and saving the day like in the last book and like
that's good.
Frey. And I was let me tell you, book 3 was a big shock to
me. Another interesting scene that's changed, and it's a pretty significant change, is the House of the Undying. And you can kind of see why they did that. But in the books, Dany gets a lot of prophetic visions. She sees a lot of things that are happening or going to happen to characters that would have been, pretty difficult. Yeah, pretty spoilery.
Yeah.
So I want to read I want to read this because I think this is interesting. Again, in the books, Dany is seeing future events, prophetic events. I kind of see that what she sees in the show is a glimpse of what could be, but also a temptation to hold her there. So let's walk through what Dany sees. Dany, at first, she's in King's Landing. She sees the throne room, place she's never seen before. The ceiling has collapsed. There's snow or ash. It's probably snow. She's reaching out to touch the Iron Throne, and she hears a baby cry. She then is at the wall, and she's walking through the gate under the wall. She sees a tent, and she enters probably somewhere on the Dothraki Sea again, back with Drogo and her son that she lost. And so if you think about that is a temptation. It's the warlocks, the Undying trying to keep her there, trying to show her some of the things. King's Landing is gone, the throne is lost, the world has collapsed. There's snow everywhere, but you can go back to your husband if you stay with us. But also, depending on what happens in season 8, could this also be a prophetic vision of what awaits Dany? King's Landing broken. She's been to the wall. Does she die? And in the afterlife, she goes back to Drogo and the son she never had. I'm almost starting to cry here.
Everything you're saying is very powerful. Yeah.
Brett?
I don't know, because I never thought of it. I kind of have the feeling that she's going to be the one that goes instead of Jon, because Jon's just always sad. And then even if they win, Jon still needs to brood, and that'd be one way. He's gonna be like, oh, so 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 I don't know. I just but I didn't think of that, that the what is it, Pyat Pri and the Warlock. Well, it's just him, right? In the show, right?
In the show, right?
Do they even reference him as Pyat Pri? I can't.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
As far as Daxos, I think, calls him Pyat.
Oh, okay. Because both those chapters and that episode are both fuzzy to me. I was having trouble remembering what happens, but no, I think I never thought of that, but I don't know. I think she did see a vision of the future and her ultimate death. But that is a good point. So,
and the chapter in the book is sorry, my teenage voice just cracked there a little bit.
Then you are a man.
All right, so that chapter in the books, which is one of my favorite, is just so full of imagery and prophetic visions, and gives Dany a glimpse to the other side of the world. And I think that a lot of people love that chapter, and there's some people who don't necessarily like the scene in the show, but I think it works in a different way. And for what we talked about, that it's a temptation. It's like Satan tempting Christ in the desert to convince him not to go through with what he's planning to do. And also, if you want a Lord of the Rings reference, it's Frodo looking into Galadriel's mirror of what awaits him and what awaits the Shire and all that. And I just think it's a pretty powerful scene when you think about it in that context.
Yeah, and I think it plays up that it's important for Dany to have a mystical experience in Qarth, because by God, if she didn't have that mystical experience, nothing else happens in Qarth.
Right.
Right. So they really did have to go through with that, and so I thought that it was a relatively elegant compromise from the acid trip that he has in the books.
Yeah.
I was fine with it.
A few other scenes that I think were done very well in the show, and I'm going to throw out a few here, and then we can discuss them. Brett and I actually talked about this on our unaired pilot. But in the show, Tyrion takes a chance and demands a trial by combat, whereas in the books, Oberyn has already laid the groundwork, saying, I will be your champion, and then Tyrion chooses the trial by combat. I think this show kind of works a little better, because it puts Tyrion out there, I'm going to do this. I'm going to demand a trial by combat. I'm going to let the gods decide, fuck you, Tywin.
Because it sets the stakes. And also we kind of if you've not read the books, Oberyn volunteering to be the champion when it looks really bad, like he was hoping Jaime could do something, or he hoped Bronn could do something. I mean, Oberyn's speech delivers at that moment.
A few others, Brienne versus the Hound, which is a phenomenal scene, a phenomenal
solid fight. Not only is it a great fight, but it's a great lead-in between Brienne and Arya, and then the Hound. That's when the Hound kind of steps up. He's no longer Arya's captor, but he is Arya's protector, and that's a powerful moment. And both of those characters mean Arya well. So their fighting is ironic, but it's like oh, what a brutal fight and solid fight. That was well done,
I was
well
Yes.
done.
like, can't y'all just sit down and talk about it?
Yeah, mom and dad, and then
Yeah.
then it pays off season 7 whenever they're reunited at the Dragon Pit, and Brienne's like, oh, Arya, she's a badass now, and the house like, yeah,
I hate it when mom and dad fight.
Ser Jorah, I think the show makes him a more sympathetic character. He's less creepy. I mean, one, he looks a lot better, obviously. Um, Ygritte, in the books, Ygritte dies anonymously by an anonymous arrow.
yeah,
I don't like that Ole kills her, but I appreciate that John gets to have like a last moment with her versus just finding her dead in the books, which also works because it's kind of a symbol for here are these two forces fighting each other and these two people who love each other, and they're killing each other for what reason, and here's what John loses in that battle to a woman that he loves.
Yeah, all the battles in those books are really well done in that we kind of feel ambiguously about, do we really want these guys to win or those guys to win, and everybody loses something in these battles, which I appreciate. Yeah, and for the record, I defend Ollie. So,
oh God.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I thought about it. I mean, like, the Wild Leagues killed his parents. He watched them get brutally murdered.
The Red Wedding, much more brutal. I mean, it's definitely obviously very brutal in the chapter. But Talissa Stark is pregnant, and she gets her belly stabbed. That's absolutely terrible. But Rob and Talissa's relationship is also built pretty well throughout the series. I mean, you can argue whether you like the circumstances with Jane Westerling more, but it makes you more sympathetic to everything that he's losing there by her being present and having gotten to know her.
In general, Rob is a character that is well served by the show.
Yes,
because he's a character that we hear about. Catelyn is told that her son is doing great things, and we see him through her eyes occasionally when he's around. But we actually see Rob, and Rob is a very he's a handsome and charismatic character. So I agree entirely with what you're saying. The show really brought a lot of these characters that are described and told about on the page, but we actually get to see the show.
Yeah.
So it worked. I'm not gonna complain that we didn't get Jane Westerling.
Right.
That we had this strange foreign beauty showing up, stealing away our king. But I'm not gonna complain. I thought it was fine.
I thought Stannis was the one true king.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's all I have to
say. The ruins of Valyria. In the books, and correct me if I'm wrong in pronouncing this incorrectly, but Tyrion and company sail through Croyane.
Yeah, it was the Sorrows. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's a ruined, Roynish city. It's spelled. Anyways, I think it's Croyane or something. But I like that we get a view of Valyria. I mean, that makes it more symbolic of where Tyrion is going.
It makes it a real place, because we hear a lot about Valyria and old Valyria, and oh, I speak Valyrian, and oh, I have my Valyrian steel, and have you seen my Valyrian parasol, and whatever. But it's good that for a place that's talked about, we actually see. And so I like that. And for the record, although I enjoy the stuff in the books with John Connington and Aegon and possibly Rhaegar's son, etc. I did not mind it being just Jorah and Tyrion sailing through Valyria, because first off, I like those two actors, and for Ian Glenn reciting poetry about the doom that came to Valyria, that was pretty great.
Yes. Yeah.
I just hope they throw a wrench in season 8 and like Aegon and John Connington are like the leaders of They don't even have to be Aegon. They could just be, Griff and young Griff, and they have blue hair, and they just land. They don't even have to expand on it.
Just when the
Just
Golden Company shows up, it's just actually the Aegon and
It's
yeah,
John Connington.
the Golden Company is just like Strong Belwas and all have never been in the show, and
Lady
like
Stoneheart will be with the Golden Company.
yes.
yes, people be like, what the fuck?
They're gonna show up with Euron's Krakens too.
Oh yeah, they'd be riding them to Westeros. Um, and then finally, something that the show has really done a job of expanding and giving us more insight are the others, the White Walkers. We get, we don't get a lot. I mean, if you look at the totality of the show, there's not a lot of them, but it's a whole hell of a lot more than you get in the books. So I think that's done really well. And Pat, you talked a little earlier about how they kind of elevate the White Walkers while diminishing or erasing some of these other elements of politics or prophecy that are in the books.
Yeah. In general, I like the way the show is presenting the White Walkers, and I like some kind of concrete evidence that Craster's children were being converted into the White Walkers. I thought that all fits very well.
Yeah.
And I like the imagery of. I just like the imagery of them. I mean, I think it's very very cool.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the books we will have different situations going on with the others, but I'm kind of satisfied with the Night King is very iconic looking. So
Yeah.
Were you satisfied with Todrick Stark?
oh, Todrick Stark, man, Todrick Stark, baby, shirtless Todrick Stark. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Go ahead.
Brett, do you have anything on that?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about some things that were left out of the show. Maybe it was a mistake that they were left out. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's kind of a mixed bag. Lady Stoneheart. George has said that he really wishes she had been in there. Now, whether that's because she, has an impact on Jon's resurrection, or something in the Riverlands, or something with the end game, or he just thinks that she is an interesting character and her motivations are interesting and are kind of a parallel for some of the other characters. I don't know. We don't know. What do you think about the exclusion of Lady Stoneheart in the show?
I think I don't know. I guess show. I don't know. I just don't feel it. Like they're trying to consolidate, and I just don't feel like if they were going to introduce her, it would have had to been early. I don't know. That I just
They
doesn't.
skipped over too
Yeah.
soon, maybe, and couldn't go back.
Maybe and maybe her contract was up. I have a hard time imagining her in the show. I guess at this point, it would have been cool, but there's no really end goal for her. That is, yeah. That's. I mean, I didn't have much to say about her.
I guess I feel that when Catelyn dies in the third book, that I was really bummed out because I wanted there to be some kind of like resolution between Jon and Catelyn because early on when I was reading it, I realized that Jon was Lyanna Stark's son. I just figured that out like halfway through book 2 or something, and so I wanted there to be a point where Jon and Catelyn had this discussion about that. So when she died, I was like, oh, son of a bitch. First, Jon can't get the news from Ned, and now he can't patch things up with Catelyn. And then the epilogue of book 3, she returns as a zombie, and I was like, holy fuck, oh my god. So and I think people who'd read the books were really looking forward to seeing that happen. So
Yeah.
so the fact that George, I think that might be the only thing that George has said that he wishes they had included. I mean, I think he has said,
Right.
The show is deviating from the books. They're doing their own thing. There's the butterfly effect. He kind of is more neutral on other changes, But Lady Stoneheart is something that he says, I really wish she had been there. So I feel that she might be like an essential element that is making going to make the show story like not as good as it could be.
I think
But I
so,
guess
yeah.
I have to accept that she's not there. She's not going to show up unless she shows up in the last 5 minutes of the final episode. At this point,
Just,
Yeah.
right? I guess
yeah,
the only
but
good thing about it is that I like Beric Dondarrion so much, and he dies in the books for her to be born. That with her not being around, we get more Lord Beric, who I like. I
Yeah.
do like Lord Beric.
I like the actor too,
Yeah,
of Beric, and yeah.
Mance Rayder. So Mance Rayder really burns alive
yeah,
in the first episode of season 5. Mance's arc in A Dance with Dragons is we've talked about that earlier when we were talking specifically about season 5 and Winterfell and all of that. But was that a mistake for him to die, or is that another one of those consolidation of season 5 characters like Stannis and Barristan that the show just decided, well, we don't need him going forward? Because I think he dies in the end. I mean, I don't think Mance survives the series.
I'm just I just don't know. Like, I just don't know where his story ends. Like, he's just one of those characters where there's just not enough to know if it's. Well, for me, I just don't know enough to really make that call because his story's not finished in the books, whereas it is in the show. And maybe
yeah.
it could have been one of those things where the show saw these details and they were like, and threw it out. But it could be really important in the book. So I'm just not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. If they had already kind of worked out their kind of like truncated Winterfell storyline, and there is just no way to kind of bring Mance in any kind of reasonable way, I guess it's not a mistake to exclude him. We just kind of feel that loss, particularly when uh, when you discover that Rattleshirt is not Rattleshirt but really Mance in the books, that the real Rattleshirt died in Mance's place. Yeah, that's exciting, and the whole commando trip that Mance does with the Spearwives to infiltrate Winterfell. That's a bold story. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like, I am not unhappy with that story. Um, so I miss it, but I guess I couldn't call it a mistake. But I mean, mistakes have been made on the show.
Right.
But I don't. I guess I wouldn't call it a mistake. But it's one of those things that feel
You know,
like down.
it's a real mistake is not including Varamir six skins or four
Oh.
skins. Varamir.
You're right.
Varamir foreskins.
Well, in another episode, Brett mistakenly said
Blackwater,
Varamir
right?
foreskins, and he said no, six skins, and I said, well, he's had so many foreskins.
Right.
It's like, so yeah, I think that Mance is a interesting character, but I'm just not sure where he goes from there. Although I'm really looking forward to what happens in Winterfell and in the Winds of Winter. So I want to. We already talked about Dorne and the Vale. I mean, those are two great arcs in in the books that unfortunately just either failed to pay off or weren't included when we're talking about the Vale that probably should have been done differently. But let's talk. Let's make our last point on Euron Greyjoy.
Okay.
So I want to jump back to the White Walkers real quick because Port Quentin has a pretty interesting theory that, and I'm not sure how much I agree with this, but because there's not really a Night King or a Night's King character in A Song of Ice and Fire. There's one in history, but not in A Song of Ice and Fire. Obviously, that's the big bad. That's the big bad in the show. Poor Quentin thinks that some of what Euron Greyjoy is going to do in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, perhaps, are some of the things that the Night's King or the Night King may be doing in the show. That he is the he's the King Koopa. He's the final villain that you have to overcome. We've seen the Tywin and Joffrey be the first act villain, if you will, very political. We've seen Ramsay kind of be the middle act villain, kind of a personal villain to the Starks and to other characters. And then you've got this really big bad who's just trying to basically, for whatever reason, destroy the world or whatever his motivation is, his goal is. But the show, and I think we actually made a mistake earlier in the episode. I think we talked that, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think Euron returns in season 5.
Season 6 is when he shows
season
up.
6.
Yeah.
So season 6. And of course we were talking about season 5 and beyond, so it wasn't necessarily a mistake. But it almost seems like the show decided, oh shit, we need him for some reason for the end game, so we better put him back in there. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Euron. I mean, Euron in the show has a lot of elements of Victarion in him, with the battle axe and all that. He's not the sadistic, twisted, magical villain that he is in the books.
Yeah, we definitely don't see any of the magical stuff that's overtly. And I think they've hinted at the sadism by having him like remove the tongues of the crewmen. So we kind of get that he's a bad dude, but definitely he seems to be his own kind of different character in the show than he is in the books. I like you bringing up poor Quentin's theory about how he's kind of like the supernatural king menace in the books, and like you, I kind of would not be surprised if it goes that way, but I would not be surprised if it doesn't really go that way because these books are complicated, and and George might have something unexpected for us to have to deal with. Comes to Euron.
I think he's going to try, but whether or not he succeeds, I don't know.
He seems more like a secular political villain in the show than a supernatural villain that he is in the books.
Yeah. So I think that's we've had a long talk, guys. We've covered a lot. I think we come to the conclusion, and correct me if I'm wrong, and you all say what you think, but I think we walk away that there are some problems with the show. There are some mistakes that were made, or exclusions or inclusions that shouldn't have been. But this show is unlike anything else on TV. Yes, you've got the fantasy, you've got this big budget spectacle, but even in these latter seasons, there are significant character moments. There are significant drama. There's a lot to love in this show.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. The fact that shows that don't deserve Emmys are also like nominated for Emmys, but I think in this case, HBO getting 22 nominations for Emmys for Game of Thrones just feels right. The fact that that Nikolai Coster-Waldau gets one this year finally, after putting in so many awesome years with fantastic acting, makes me happy. So no, I think there's a lot to love with the show.
I mean, it's rare that you just like you see a main character fucking his sister in the first episode, and then you really like him by the
right.
That takes it takes good acting to make you forget about that. I think
right. But good acting and a good story.
Yeah, well, yeah, and obviously a good story too. But so I definitely agree that it's the best show on television. Making that hot take. Maybe not the most well written, but it's got its great points and it's got its really bad points. But if it wasn't for the show, I wouldn't be doing this right now. So
that's right.
It definitely gets people fired up and putting their own creative energies into engaging with the show. So there's a lot there. It's quite a thing.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap on The Great Divide. I mean, The Great Divide still exists, but I think we've placed we're building some bridges across those. maybe we're mining some rocks and throwing it down the ravine and filling it up, and people need to appreciate both properties, both the book and the show, for what they are. You can still criticize. I mean, that's your right as a viewer with an opinion, but understand that there's a lot of good things that the show does. So Pat, thank you. I know we promised this wouldn't be 3 hours, and I don't think that it will end up being 3 hours. But you've been a champ tonight. You've hung in there through our technical difficulties. So thank you for joining us. Please tell the audience where they can find you, and if you're working on anything right now that they might be of interest.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter address is patman23. If you go to my blog, patricksponaugle.com, and I'm not going to spell it for you, you can just figure it out. You can find all of my Game of Thrones stuff and other things that I might be writing. Or if you just go to Watches on the Wall, find links to all the essays that I've written for them, instead of my personal essays. And I'm currently working on another feature for Watches on the Wall, but I've been rewriting it for the past month. Eventually, I might get it out. So, but other than that, every so often I'll write something for Watchers, and that you'll find my stuff there.
Well, we'll definitely make sure to put some links in the description and stuff. So
fantastic, thanks.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to your next article on Watchers on the Wall, and we'll watch your blog religiously, and I want that to stay in a Sparathian essay.
Yeah, I'll send you some links. I'll send you a link.
Thank you so much for coming on here, though. It's been fun.
I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I think that about wraps it up. Thank everyone for listening, and again, thank you, Pat, for joining us. You can find us on SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, and YouTube, as well as Twitter and Facebook. And you can email us at planetospodcast@gmail.com for any questions or ideas, or you can find us on Twitter to do those wonderful things as well. I've been one of your hosts, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
And I've been Travis. We hope you join us for another episode. See you around Planetos. Thanks, everyone.
The intro song was written by Dylan Rivas and myself, and the outro song is by Bleach Garden, and it's called Smack.